All right, so we want to speak about inspections, I think Leslie and I, and the importance of it. And we spoke about it before, but general inspections, as we said before, really include you. Number one, you should always inspect a home. But not only that, if you're renting or buying a corporate condo or an apartment or a house, renting it, you really should inspect it. And the general inspections really include you would be looking at all the systems, right? The heating, the AC, the plumbing inspections, check the electrical box. You would be checking the roof. You would really check appliances if those are included, right, in the home. And really all the systems. You look at the inside of the property, right, as well as the outside of the property. So see if any trees have fallen. You want to see if anything's close to the house, anything's impacting the house, whether it be the foundation. So going back to the interior, you would also look at the roof. If you could walk up to the attic, check the check the the inside of the attic to see the roof, as well as you would check for rodents and to see if there were any insects or rodents in the attic, especially in the winter when they tend to nest. You want to check the basement. You want to check to make sure there are no leaks, the plumbing. You want to check the to see if there are any environmental concerns in the basement, such as asbestos. Even asbestos, not only on the pipes, but it could be on the heating element, on the furnace. So often you see that in homes. I know in many splits they have them in as part of the heating system. You would see a piece of asbestos. So you really have to look at for environmental issues as well as structural issues, right?
Yep, and you also want to look for mold, and maybe bring a separate inspector for that. Also the pipes to make sure, there's new issues with where you can actually look inside the pipes to see if there's any issues related to that. And they have special instruments that can go into the piping, and I always think that's a good idea as well, if possible and if allowed, because there are extra tools, and you would definitely need permission to do that type of inspection.
Right. You
I
can't.
think too, there should be a distinction that's made between why am I doing this inspection and what's the result of it going to be, right? Because there are certain things that you may find that, I mean, look, you look deeply enough, you're going to find some things that, are not 100% or what have you. And then it comes down to, okay, well, are these things that, that are I can live with, and they're not going to affect, my ability to try to renegotiate, something with my offer. But then on the financing side, it's like, okay, are these things that a bank or a lender, cares about in terms of will this affect the ability to be able to get a loan, right? Most of the stuff is not going to affect your ability, but there are certain things that like mold, asbestos, anything that is health or safety related that would then affect the ability to even get the mortgage, right?
I mean, definitely the oil tank. I mean, I've seen a lot of banks come back, they want to re-inspect
Yep.
to see what's going on, and it costs people money once, they come out and have to re-inspect. And it comes with your whole closing, really. I mean,
Right.
You have to wait for that inspector to come out, and if it doesn't meet their guidelines, it could delay your closing.
Yep.
Especially oil tanks. I mean, once what happens is if you have an underground tank, and sometimes sellers don't even know about it, because when they bought it 20 years ago, they may have inherited the problem, but they weren't aware of it. Or
Right.
never checked that, or 30 years ago. So it could have been sitting in the ground, and when the buyer does the inspection, a really good investigator will find it, right? So now you have to remove it. If there's a spill, is a DC number that gets attached to it that has to be cleaned up, right?
Right. You have to wait for the spill number to be closed out.
Right. And that could delay a closing. So you
Sure.
really want to address those specific issues as quickly as possible. I also think that after you do a general inspection, as Leslie said, there could be some more specific concerns, right? So maybe the home inspector, and by the way, they all have to be licensed in the state of New York, and I'm sure in other states as well. But if they find something, let's say they find a roof issue, you may want to have a roofer come out and really either use drone for a roof inspection, or some of them even go on top of the roof to really check to see, if there are shingles, if there are any missing shingles or if anything has moved. So they really want to check the roof. That could be one a further inspection. And also sometimes there's an issue with the sewer line. So as Leslie said, they'll go in and you have to hire a plumber who does this, and they check the whole sewer line going out to the street. So, and that could be a very costly situation because they take cameras, and you really, you have to ask the homeowner if that would be acceptable to them. Because it's really, it looks to see if there's any roots that have clogged up the system into the street. Specifically also if there's any structural issues, such as you walk into a home and you see that the floors are very creaky, or there are cracks in the foundation, or there are the slanted door frames, you really would want to have a structural engineer
Right.
check to make sure that there is no further damage, or the quality or the structural integrity of the structure is not questioned.
Right.
So that's something that you really want to have done. A client of mine recently had an issue with a walkway approaching the house because it was in the complex and it had certain elevations, and they had to have a structural engineer look at it just to make sure there was proper support.
Right.
In like northern Westchester and other, maybe some areas around here, you have to do potentially a septic inspection. And in Westchester, upon signing a contract, if there's a well, you have to do a well test with
The
it.
well test. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
What about when, I mean, obviously this is for anybody that's buying resales, right? What's your recommendation when you have like a client that's, buying something that's, either been, completely now built up from scratch again, or, is buying new construction? What's your advice on, is it necessary to do a home inspection on a brand new, when you're buying brand new construction?
Right. I personally recommend it. I think it's important to have, sorry about the noise, but I mean, my personal opinion, as I suggest with the rental, right? People say, what do I have to? I'm only renting. I think it's important to do a house inspection, especially if people are flipping properties, because they may be doing it quickly and
Right.
have total regard for the construction. But I personally think it's good even if you're doing buying new construction, to inspect.
if you're permitted to. I mean, a lot of these new, complexes or apartments or, things that are being put up, they don't allow it. So,
That's a good point, right?
I mean,
Right.
you could do like a quick, walk through at the end,
Right.
and you sort of, do a punch list, but you're not going to get.
A full-blown
And
inspection.
I've asked on many occasions, and they will not permit it on many of them. So
Right.
get it, great, but it's not always. I mean,
Right.
we're in a house, maybe a spec house, where
Right.
you can maybe do it. But
Right,
like
but
in a complex, I don't usually
think
see
they would
it.
allow it.
Right.
But I'm one-off, like construction, if you bring it in, I mean, the ones I've sold, they typically have allowed, but it's not, as Leslie said, it's not been a whole community. It's been, one home being built by a spot builder, and typically they've allowed somebody to come in and just, check the house
Right.
to make sure it's okay. Or even as Leslie said, when they do the punch list or the final walkthrough, they'll have somebody just come in.
Hmm.
Do that, on a few
Right.
occasions. I mean,
Right.
here and there we've gotten it approved, but it for the most part,
They don't
some of
want
these
it.
bigger complexes where there's big builders doing this, they're just not open to that. They're definitely not open to escrows.
Right.
Right.
It's almost never see it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I definitely, on like, for people that are purchasing condos and co-ops, you definitely also don't see as many people take, like schedule inspections, right? Like they do when they're buying a home. Although, there are definitely some older buildings and units where, like, I would totally recommend that,
Yeah.
like, it makes sense to, I always feel like it's money it's not money that you're wasting, getting the inspection done.
Right. I mean, we did an inspection on a co-op, not, well, I didn't, my client did, not maybe 2 months ago, and they weren't going, they weren't wanted to. They were advised by their attorney, actually. And I told them, you find things out. There's an electrical panel in the building, in the apartment. They're not going to check the roof. They're not allowed to check
Right.
the major systems of the building, but they get a sense.
The walls in. Hmm.
Right. And
You know what you're buying. I
Right.
mean, and sort of what has to be upgraded, what doesn't, even if they're not going to, the seller's not going to do anything about it, at least
Right.
you know what
Right. Exactly.
more for informational purposes only. And I think that's the other thing we wanted to speak about. I think we touched upon it last time, was that in the hot market, the market continues to be strong, I believe. I still think going into 2025, there'll be a strong market where many people, they don't necessarily waive the inspection unless maybe they're contractors or architects or builders, but they will do it for informational purposes only. And that built into that concept is that they're not going to renegotiate the price once the inspection is done. That is not always the case, but people say that. So,
it's almost no,
right.
it's almost never the case.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
Once you do it, whatever's said
Right.
goes out the window. The other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes you make it contingent. You sign the contract contingent on an inspection. I prefer not to do that if at all
Right.
possible, and have you do all the inspections ahead of time. I mean, the radon's usually a contingency. That's not the biggest
This takes
deal.
time.
But I would never. I prefer not to sign a contract before. I know Jersey, they do it differently.
Right.
You don't really sign a contract; you just sign a tentative contract without money changing hands. But
Right.
here, I think it's optimal to do the inspection before.
Right.
Once you lose control of the down payment, it's always a negotiation. So I feel like it's always better to do your inspections before.
Before it's fully executed, right? Like while you're still doing all of your due diligence. Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's interesting when you mentioned radon. Not every community suggests radon, or even home inspectors or the association who oversees home inspectors, they don't necessarily recommend radon, especially in Long Island, because it's built on sand, right? Which I was surprised to learn. And although I do recommend it, still it's not a very costly item, and especially if the house has a lot of granite or stone in it, where radon can come from. If it's not suitably, or they have a ton of it, it's a good idea. Still, it's money to me. Well, worth spent.
Right.
So.
Agreed.
Agreed. All around.
Right? We don't want any problems, especially once people move in, and we always tell them to have an inspection. And if they really opt out of it, if they choose not to, I know in my office I have to sign a form
Right.
stating their decision not to do an inspection. Also, we forgot to mention termites, right? So part of the general inspection is pest control and typically termites, which a bank usually requires, correct?
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So any other ideas that you could think of regarding inspections or and mortgages or financing?
No, I mean, I think I would just leave it with, that it's, I've what I have come across, right, like on the financing side, sometimes is somebody that's getting ready to spend $1 million plus on a home, and they're like, oh, I don't really know if I need to spend the extra money to do the home inspection. Like, I'm going to buy the house regardless, and I would just say, like, your a home is pretty much the biggest
Ask-
item that most people will purchase in their lifetime, and spending another $1,000 or whatever the cost is, is it's information that is really critical, for the longevity that and the happiness too that you want to be in the home. Because I've also seen too where people have done the inspections and then they just kind of like glossed over everything, like they're like, oh, I'm buying this house because I love it so much, like I don't even care what's in the report. But it's important to take a pause
Right.
and because listen, I'm saying that because I actually like am one of those people that did that once with a home. Like I love the home so much, and they were like, well, there's probably going to be an issue with the roof, but it's like not immediate.
Right.
But we were the first big rainstorm that we had. At my newly painted home, we had leaks and had to, deal with that issue. And then it cost more money to then repaint. And I wish that like I would have paid a little bit more attention up front and maybe done something immediately to like fix that part of the roof,
Right.
before we actually moved in. Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, it makes sense to just be knowledgeable about what you're getting yourself into.
Totally.
And also to anticipate and to try to find out, like if you know there's a roof issue or a drainage issue or a sewer line issue, you can get those costs up front by just calling in people, more specific experts in the field. And
Right.
how much is this roof going to cost me? Can I wait 5 years to do it? Or does it have to be
Right.
done immediately? I think the other thing, and I don't know if we really touched on it, is we're focusing a lot on the inside, but when the inspector does it, they typically start on the outside of the home and they really look at the facade, right? How long is that facade going to last? If it's stucco, does it need to
Right.
be painted? Cracks in it. They also look at the ground, the land towards the ground. Is it pitched towards the house or away from it? So they're going to look at a lot of different the trees. Are the trees too close to the house?
Yes, that was a great point that you brought up earlier about trees, right? Like is it, do you, I live in a home that's surrounded by trees. And one of the things that our home inspector recommended was getting an arborist out to check a couple of the trees that look like maybe they were dying and they were potential trees that like, one bad storm could fall and like land, completely on your home. So
Right.
very important to have that stuff checked out as well.
It really is.
Absolutely.
Right.
I actually have had closings where I was about to close and there was a storm and the tree fell on the roof and
That was it.
Yeah. And that was that.
Oh, it's something that you really should take care of in advance. Even though in my own house, I had trees around it, and one major storm, I was the only house on the street. It was the most bizarre thing. My house was hit by 3 huge trees, one on either side of the house, and one on the roof. Thank God nobody got hurt, and my roof did not have to be replaced. But it was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. But you really should. People are so they're always so focused on the inside of the house. Like one of my
Right.
decorator or design, but they really need to look at the exterior
Totally.
as well. It's
the basics.
All right. Sounds good.
listen. Have a great week, and we hope to see you soon with our Instagram live.
All right. Sounds
Have a good.
great. Have a wonderful week, all. Bye bye.
Bye bye.